Everything began with a name. Or rather, with the erasure of one. Because some stories begin this way, not with a grand crime, but with a small, bureaucratic one, committed on paper. A signature. A seal. A will reinterpreted. And when you wake up the next morning, everything is gone, your home, your name, your place, your future. All that remains is yourself. That is, if you are fortunate. Vivian Ashford was fortunate. Or at least, she was alive. On mornings like that, it was enough. Her father, Sir Edmund Ashford, had passed away on a cold November morning, quietly, in his room, in his sleep. The death was not unexpected, his heart had been failing for years, and the doctors had long warned them. But warning does not prepare one for grief. Vivian had loved her father, deeply, and with a love returned in equal measure. And within the loss, that love was the heaviest thing of all. She was given no time to mourn. Because before the funeral had even taken place, her uncle, Reginald Ashford, had arrived from London, still in his traveling clothes, in a hurry, as though he had known in advance and come prepared. Vivian realized this detail only later. In that moment, she saw only her uncle, her father's younger brother, estranged years ago after a disagreement, rarely seen, but still bound by blood. Reginald was polite on the first day. Less so on the second. On the third, he brought his lawyer. Vivian did not fully understand the matter of the will, or perhaps she refused to understand, because understanding would mean accepting it. But the lawyer explained. Coldly, flatly, as if reading from a page. Sir Edmund Ashford's final will had been declared invalid on certain technical grounds, grounds Vivian found entirely unconvincing, yet could not disprove. The Ashford estate, along with the majority of its income, was to pass, as a matter of legal inheritance, to Reginald Ashford through the male line. What remained for Vivian? A modest annual income, precisely at the threshold of sufficient for survival, but nothing more. And the condition that she vacate the house within 6 months. Vivian looked at the lawyer. Then at her uncle. Reginald had turned his face toward the window, looking outside, as though the conversation did not concern him, as though he were not even in the room. It was the greatest cowardice Vivian had ever witnessed. Because to act, even cruelly, is more honest than to refuse to look while doing so. She did not speak a single word that day. Because there was only one thing to say, this is not right. And saying it, in that room, to that lawyer, to that uncle, would have meant nothing. Words, without power, simply hang in the air. Vivian knew this. So she chose silence. And began to plan. 6 months was both a very long time, and no time at all. Long, because waking each morning in the same house, now no longer hers, made breathing difficult. Short, because there was much to be done. And Vivian, with the most valuable inheritance her father had left her, her systematic mind, wasted none of it. She began with research. Why the will had been invalidated. What legal reasoning had been used. Where and how that reasoning had been constructed. She met with her father's lawyer. He too was surprised, but powerless. Against a London lawyer, there was little a provincial man of law could do. But Vivian found something. Small, but significant. The technical grounds for invalidating the will rested upon the signature of a witness. That witness denied ever signing it, but he was old and ill, in no condition to appear in court. And where was he employed at the time? The Wyndham household. One of London's most established families. The home of Lord Wyndham, Reginald Ashford's oldest business associate. And Lord Wyndham's daughter, young, beautiful, the darling of society, had recently announced her engagement. To Duke Aldrich Vane. When Vivian saw the connection, Wyndham, the witness, her uncle, the will, something inside her both froze and ignited. The part that froze was shock. Because such a calculated, interconnected, deliberate theft did not come from simple greed, but from long preparation. The part that ignited was resolve. Because if this was the connection, if the Wyndham family was involved, then the evidence was there. In that house. Somewhere within those walls, those drawers, those conversations. Vivian made a decision. She would enter that house. The idea of the mask came by accident. Everyone who knew Vivian, neighbors, townspeople, her father's acquaintances, knew her face. The daughter of Ashford. Sir Edmund's only child. Tall, dark-haired, with her father's eyes. Recognizable. And recognition would end everything. One morning, as she looked in the mirror, she thought, what if her face were not seen? At first, the idea seemed absurd. Then less so. Then like the only possible way. There was an old woman in town, a former theater costumer, now rarely leaving her home, but whose craftsmanship remained impeccable. Vivian went to her. She had no money to offer. Instead, she brought 2 rare volumes from her father's library. The woman understood. She asked no questions. The mask resembled white porcelain, light, delicate, covering the left cheek and chin, leaving the eyes and mouth visible. It was almost beautiful. A strange beauty, indefinable, unplaceable. And that was precisely the point, to be unplaceable. The story was simple, a childhood illness, a fever that left marks on her face. The family had taken pity and employed her. She could not appear without the mask. When Vivian told this story, something inside her twisted, because an identity built on pity was not an honorable one. But honor, at times, must wait for a greater truth. She could wait. She was patient. The Wyndham estate stood in West London, rising behind a long stone wall. When Vivian first saw it, what did she feel? Anger? No, something colder. The cold clarity of seeing a target. Something was inside those walls, a document, a confession, a witness. And to find it, she had to pass through that door. She had heard of the servant position through indirect means, a mutual acquaintance repeating Lady Wyndham's own words. The household was expanding due to the upcoming wedding preparations. They required someone experienced, calm, reliable. Vivian applied. She arrived at the interview in a servant's uniform, wearing the mask. Lady Wyndham examined her for 30 seconds, unbothered by the mask, even faintly pleased by it, as though it made her more interesting. But the true reason was simpler. Vivian spoke calmly, chose her words carefully, and there was something trustworthy in her eyes. In servant selection, that mattered more than anything. "Your name?" Lady Wyndham asked. Vivian paused for a second. Then, "Eliza, my lady." Her grandmother's name. At least she could keep that much. "Eliza," Lady Wyndham repeated, as though testing its taste. "How long have you been in service?" "For years, my lady." The previous household closed. References? Vivian handed over the letter she had prepared for weeks. The name was real, but the household had indeed closed, and no one remained to question it. It was the only safe gap she had found. Lady Wyndham read the letter. Returned it. Stood. "Come Monday morning. They'll show you your room." Vivian bowed, a perfect servant's bow, a gesture she had seen all her life but never performed. Something inside her tightened. Because this bow was something she had never done in her father's house. Never needed to. And now she did, and it was the most tangible, physical form of the theft. A woman, carrying the weight of her own name, bowing under another's. But she bowed. Because she had to pass through the door. And once she had passed, then she would look. Then she would find. Then, perhaps, she would stand again. With her real name. Her real face. Her rightful claim. But first, the door. Vivian Ashford entered the Wyndham household as Eliza. And no one, on that day, at that hour, noticed anything. The first week was a week of observation. Vivian watched everything, the order of the house, who worked where, which rooms were always kept locked, Lord Wyndham's daily routine, Lady Wyndham's guests. And in doing so, she was the perfect servant, silent, efficient, invisible. Because the best observer is the one no one notices. She saw Lord Wyndham on the third day. An older man, broad, with a voice that filled every room. When Vivian saw him, a cold recognition settled within her, because this man had attended her father's funeral. He had offered his condolences. Shaken her hand. And beneath that polite, firm handshake, this plan had already been there. Vivian lowered her eyes. Said good morning. Passed by. She swallowed her anger, because anger, in that house, was the most expensive luxury. And Vivian could no longer afford luxuries. Wedding preparations had seeped into every corner of the house. Florists came and went. Fabric samples were spread across the drawing room. Lady Wyndham sat for hours with her daughter Cecily, reviewing guest lists. And Cecily Wyndham, the future bride of Duke Aldrich Vane, stood at the center of it all, with the ease of a queen. When Vivian first saw her, she understood immediately, this woman was beautiful. Truly, undeniably, the kind of beauty that silences rooms. Golden hair, pale skin, exactly the kind of woman society imagined. And she knew it. In every movement, every smile, there was the deep ease of someone who knows she is being watched, and deserves to be. But Vivian now saw through the eyes of a servant, and servants see what society does not. Cecily Wyndham was one person in front of guests, another in front of servants. The difference was small, for now. But Vivian had noticed it. And what is noticed has a way of growing. On the 8th day, the Duke arrived. Vivian was at the far end of the corridor, cleaning a window, invisible, silent, forgotten. She heard the voices first, the door opening, the butler's voice, then Lady Wyndham's carefully arranged brightness. Then footsteps. Not from the stairs, but from the side corridor, toward the drawing room. And a voice. Low. Controlled. Not speaking to a room, but as if to a single person. Vivian did not drop the cloth in her hand. But she lifted her head. Duke Aldrich Vane was passing from the far end of the corridor. Tall, dark-haired, with that familiar London coldness on his face. Cecily was beside him, linked to his arm, looking up at him, speaking. But the Duke walked straight ahead. Not at Cecily. At the path before him. At the very center of the corridor, for a brief moment, his gaze shifted. And landed on Vivian. 1 second, only one. Then it passed. The drawing room door closed. Vivian lifted the cloth again. Continued wiping the window. What had that look been? Curiosity? A momentary surprise at the mask? Or something else, something Vivian could not yet define, but felt? It did not matter. It could not matter. In this house, the Duke was also a tool, not a target, but a source of information. Cecily Wyndham's fiancé. The most valuable guest of the Wyndham household. And therefore, the person Vivian needed to be most careful around. She would be careful. But that look, that single glance left behind in the dim corridor, remained suspended somewhere. Vivian tried to dismiss it. She partially succeeded. The window was clean now. She gathered the cloth. Left the corridor. Laughter rose from below, Cecily's bright, practiced laughter. And among it, now and then, that low voice. Vivian climbed the stairs. Went to her room. Closed the door. She removed the mask, as she did every night, once the door was locked. Looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was whole, no marks, no scars, no trace of illness. Only herself. Only Vivian Ashford. She touched her cheek with her finger. It was cold, from the chill of the room. 8th day, she whispered to herself. Still nothing. But she would find it. She was certain of that. She was patient. There were two kinds of people in the Wyndham household, those who were seen, and those who saw. The seen sat in the drawing room, drinking tea, talking, laughing, watching one another. The ones who saw moved through the corridors, carrying trays, drawing curtains, extinguishing candles, and in the process, hearing everything. Seeing everything. Because servants were the greatest secret of this society, to be present, yet uncounted. To exist, yet remain unseen. Vivian had been among the latter for 12 days now. And in those 12 days, she had learned more than years of observation had ever given her. Lord Wyndham rose late in the mornings, not from laziness, but from working late into the night. His study was always locked. Only he had the key. This was the first thing Vivian noted, because locked doors signaled things worth hiding. Lady Wyndham, by contrast, rose early, not from discipline, but from anxiety. She checked every corner of the house, which servant was where, whether each room was prepared, when each guest would arrive. This need for control did not come from strength, but from fear. Vivian could read it on her face. Lady Wyndham lived in constant anticipation that something would go wrong. Perhaps it was the reflection of guilt. Perhaps simply her nature. Vivian did not yet know. And Cecily. Cecily Wyndham required a study of her own. On the 12th morning, Vivian brought Cecily her tea. The chambermaid had fallen ill, and Lady Wyndham had assigned the task to her. She knocked softly. A voice came from inside, not sleepy, but fully awake, as if expecting her. Vivian entered. Cecily sat by the window, looking out. Her hair had not yet been brushed, long, loose, real in the way of mourning. This was not the Cecily the guests saw. Less polished, less prepared, less performed. Vivian set down the tray. Bowed. Your tea, Miss Wyndham. Cecily did not turn. Continued looking out the window. Is the weather clear today? She asked. Her voice was flat, neither polite nor rude. Simply flat. It appears clear, Mississippi. Aldrich is coming today. This was not shared information, more something spoken to herself. As if Vivian were not there. Every time he comes, he suggests the same thing. A walk in the garden. As if it were new each time. Vivian did not respond. It was the correct choice, because Cecily's voice did not seek an answer. It only needed somewhere to place itself. Are you someone who loves a man, Eliza? The question was unexpected. Vivian froze for a moment. Then. I don't know, Mississippi. Cecily turned. Looked directly at her for the first time, with those pale blue eyes, not at the mask, but at Vivian's gaze. It was not a sharp look. But it was assessing. An honest answer, she said. Then reached for her tea. The conversation was over. Vivian left. Standing in the corridor, she thought, did Cecily Wyndham not love the Duke? It would be too early to conclude from such a brief exchange. But there was something, in that voice, in that gaze out the window. Not anticipation, but calculation. The Duke seemed like a goal to Cecily, but was he a desired one, or merely a means to something else? Vivian did not yet know. But now she was asking the question. And a question is the beginning of an answer. The Duke arrived in the afternoon. This time, Vivian was prepared, not to be seen, but not to refrain from observing. It was the balance she had developed over 12 days, the more invisible you are, the more you see. The drawing room had been prepared. The flowers were fresh. Cecily wore her finest dress, light blue, shoulders slightly bare, precisely the kind of beauty this society admired. And she was beautiful. Vivian did not deny it, because it was true. When Duke Aldrich Vane entered, the room changed, inevitably. The man carried a strong presence. When he entered, everything else diminished slightly. It was not arrogance exactly, more the weight of something long carried, reflected in the body. This was a man who knew much. And knowing much both enlarges and burdens a person. Vivian stood at the corner, beside a small table, with a vase of water. Her task was to arrange the flowers. She had chosen it deliberately, inside the room, but at its edge. Invisible, but within hearing distance. Aldrich greeted Lady Wyndham. Shook Lord Wyndham's hand. Then turned to Cecily. And Cecily smiled, that bright, practiced smile. As Vivian arranged the flowers, she watched from the corner of her eye. Aldrich took Cecily's hand, politely, as required. Cecily spoke to him, about the garden, the weather, the new curtains her mother had ordered. The conversation was light, surface level, safe. Aldrich listened. Or appeared to. But Vivian noticed something. At times, the man paused. Brief pauses, almost imperceptible. While Cecily spoke, his eyes would drift elsewhere, for a moment, to the window, a painting, the door. Then return. Quickly, politely. But they left. And at one point, while Cecily was speaking of the curtains, those eyes drifted. And found Vivian. This time it lasted longer. 2 seconds, perhaps 3. The masked face, the hands at the vase, the lowered head. Then Cecily raised her voice, "Isn't it, Aldrich?" And he returned. "Yes, of course," he said. He likely did not know what he was agreeing to. Vivian placed another flower into the vase. Kept her hands steady. Something inside her warned her, be careful. This look was dangerous. Dangerous because it was wrong. A duke, who should have been listening to his future bride, was looking at a masked servant in the corner. This either said something troubling about the man, or, more unsettlingly, said something about Vivian. She did not yet wish to know which. As the afternoon progressed, more guests arrived. The Wyndham household was accustomed to such gatherings. People came, drank tea, spoke of wedding preparations, congratulated Cecily, observed the Duke. It was the ordinary rhythm of London society, to see and be seen. To assess and be assessed. Vivian carried trays. Served tea. Moved through the room, invisible, efficient, silent. And during these movements, she absorbed what she heard. Most conversations were empty: curtains, wedding dates, Cecily's dress, the Duke's Blackmore estate. But one conversation caught her attention. A quieter exchange between Lady Wyndham and an older lady, slightly apart from the others. As Vivian passed by, she caught only a few words. The Ashford matter. She did not stop. She could not. Stopping would draw suspicion. She continued walking. But for a moment, her heart beat differently. Ashford. Her own name. Spoken in this house, in this drawing room, from that woman's mouth. Was it coincidence? Perhaps. Ashford was not a common name, but not impossible either. But Vivian did not believe in coincidence, at least not within this house. Because if the Wyndham family was involved in her father's will, if that will was still being discussed, then this house was more dangerous than she had thought. And more valuable. She went down to the kitchen. Set the tray aside. Washed her hands. Then went back upstairs, but this time not to her room, but toward the corridor leading to Lady Wyndham's sitting room. There was a cabinet there, the one where she kept correspondence, invitation lists, the household ledger. Vivian had noticed it before. The corridor was empty. She approached the cabinet. It was not locked, only secured with a latch. She opened it. What had she expected to find? Not a grand secret, those were kept in locked drawers, not open cabinets. But even a small clue would suffice. A name. A date. A connection. The ledgers were orderly, arranged by date. Vivian scanned quickly. Guest lists, accounts, notes of correspondence. Then, November. The month her father had died. Her finger stopped. A note on the 15th of November, R.A. Document delivery. Completed. R.A. Reginald Ashford. Document delivery. Completed. It was not proof on its own. But it was a connection. The Wyndham household had exchanged a document with her uncle in the very month her father's will had been invalidated. And this had been recorded, carelessly or indifferently, in Lady Wyndham's household book. Vivian returned the ledger. Closed the cabinet. Secured the latch. She stood in the corridor. Breathed, slowly, controlled, without letting the tremor inside her surface. She had found something. Not enough, this note would be laughed out of a court. But its existence meant one thing, there was more. And that more was in this house. She would be patient. She needed more time. After dinner, the Duke had remained. This was not unusual, as the future son-in-law, he was the most privileged guest in the house. He was speaking with Lord Wyndham in the study. Cecily was at the far end of the drawing room with her mother. As Vivian walked along the corridor to check the fireplace, she heard voices, low, but slipping through the slightly open door. Lord Wyndham was speaking. Vivian slowed her steps. She could not stop, that would be dangerous. But she could slow. That matter is closed, Aldrich. It does not concern you. And Aldrich's voice, flat, cold. Everything concerns me, Wellington. Especially matters said to be closed. A brief silence. The lawyer handled everything. Lawyers can handle anything. That does not make everything right. Vivian turned the corner. She could no longer hear. But it was enough. The Duke knew of the matter. Or at least suspected something. Matters said to be closed, this meant Lord Wyndham had told him something, but Aldrich was not satisfied. The man had instinct. And that instinct was working in the right direction. Vivian did not know what to do with that thought. Because Aldrich Vane could not be an ally, he could not, must not be. He was to become Wyndham's son-in-law. He would sit at their table, share their wealth, be part of their network. His suspicion, his questions, these were good signs. But they did not make him trustworthy. Trust required time. And Vivian had no such luxury. That night, when the house had fallen silent, Vivian sat in her room. She took a piece of paper. Wrote, what she knew, what she had seen, what she had heard. A small list. The note from November 15th. The conversation about the lawyer. The witness's name, she did not yet know it, but she would. And now one more thing, Aldrich Vane's suspicion. She read the paper. Then burned it, in the fireplace, a small flame turning quickly to ash. Because leaving paper in this house meant leaving a trace. She removed the mask. Looked at herself in the mirror. She thought of her father, in his room, among his books, always reading something. He used to tell her, to win a case, you need two things, the truth, and the courage to carry it. The truth is usually there. The real question is courage. Vivian placed her finger on the edge of the mask. Did not lift it, only touched it. The courage was there in her. It always had been. But in this house, courage looked different. It was quiet. Patient. Invisible. Because it is not the one who moves first, but the one who moves at the right moment who wins. And this was not yet that moment. The next morning, Vivian encountered the Duke in the corridor. It was a coincidence, or appeared to be. Aldrich had stayed early, the house had not yet fully woken, and Vivian had come to open the windows on the first floor. They met at the corner. Both paused. Vivian immediately bowed. Prepared to pass. But Aldrich spoke. How long have you been working in this house? Vivian stopped. Raised her head, not fully, only enough. 2 weeks, my lord. He looked at her. Not at the mask, at her eyes. That was what unsettled Vivian each time. Aldrich Vane did not see the mask. He tried to see behind it. How do you find this house? A strange question. Servants were not asked such things. Vivian measured her answer. Large, my lord. And orderly. Aldrich gave a slight laugh, brief, genuine, unexpected. Orderly. Yes. As if he heard something else within the word. Orderly houses do not always appear as they are. The sentence hung in the air. Vivian wanted to take it, draw it in, examine it, understand what he meant. But she could not. Because that was not something Eliza the servant could do. Excuse me, my lord, she said. And passed. Aldrich allowed it. But before she left, Vivian felt it, did not see it but felt it. He turned. Looked once more. Vivian kept her step steady until the end of the corridor. Only after turning the corner did she stop. Were her hands trembling? She checked. No, they were not. Good. But something inside her, small, unsettling, nameless, had stirred. Orderly houses do not always appear as they are. This man knew something was wrong in this house. Or felt it. And now he had said this to a masked servant, by coincidence? Or intentionally? Vivian found both possibilities dangerous. Because if it was coincidence, it meant the man was perceptive. If intentional, it meant something far more complex. She would be careful. Very careful. She opened the windows. Morning air filled the space, cold, clean, carrying that stone-edged chill of London. Vivian took a deep breath. It had been 2 weeks. On the 17th day, the Wyndham household filled. This was the largest gathering of the month, Lady Wyndham's annual October dinner. The most distinguished names in London were invited, lords, ladies, young couples, aging patrons. And this year's dinner was special, as it marked the formal celebration of Cecily's engagement. Duke Aldrich Vane would sit with the family that evening, in full view of all, as the future groom. The house had been in preparation for 3 days. Vivian stood at the center of it, curtains drawn, silver polished, flowers arranged, the kitchen working since morning. The servants were tired, but none showed it, because Lady Wyndham's eyes were everywhere. Vivian was tired as well. But fatigue did not dull her attention, it sharpened it. Because large gatherings were when important conversations happened. And important conversations left important traces. She would observe. Guests began arriving at 7. Vivian served in the drawing room, tray in hand, silent, invisible. She wore this role now like a second skin. Being Eliza required no effort anymore, it was enough to step Vivian back, just slightly. The body continued, the eyes worked. Cecily was magnificent that evening. There was no denying it. A cream silk dress, a pearl necklace resting at her throat, her hair arranged with precision. When she entered the room, several men faltered, barely perceptibly, but they did. Cecily knew it, and with that knowledge, with that deep ease, she moved through the room. Aldrich arrived later. Whether the delay was intentional or not, Vivian could not tell. But each time Cecily's eyes turned to the door, that calculated expectation flickered across her face. When he entered, Cecily walked toward him, graceful, measured, exactly as required. She extended her hand. Aldrich took it. Politely, as much as necessary. Vivian watched as she carried the tray. Did these two not love each other? Was it too early to ask? Perhaps. But on Aldrich's face, controlled, cold, nothing lit when he saw Cecily. Nor did it dim. It was simply, flat. As if this engagement were not an event, but an agreement. And agreements require no glow. Dinner began at 8. The long table, under candlelight, was filled with 22 people. Vivian and the other servants moved around it, plates came and went, wine was poured and emptied, conversations rose and fell. Vivian carried out each round carefully, noting where she stood, what she heard. Lord Wyndham sat at the head, loud, cheerful, with the familiar ease of a host. He spoke with guests, made jokes, raised glasses. As Vivian watched him, something cold remained within her. This man had appeared exactly the same at her father's funeral. Cheerful. Relaxed. The ease of those without guilt. At the other end of the table sat Aldrich. Cecily beside him. They spoke, surface level, polite. But at times, Aldrich looked toward the lower end of the table. Vivian tried to understand where those looks went. Toward someone? Or simply forward, as one does when thinking? Midway through the meal, Cecily laughed, a full, bright laugh that drew the room's attention. A guest had said something, and Cecily seized it. The room laughed. Aldrich laughed as well, late, measured, a beat behind the others. Vivian noticed. And did not let it show. What truly mattered came after dinner. The guests had moved into the drawing room. There was music, a small quartet in the corner, musicians Wyndham regularly hosted. Conversations had scattered into small groups. And Vivian was serving drinks, moving from one corner to another with her tray. Cecily stood at the center of a group of ladies. She laughed, spoke, gestured. A full performance. And as Vivian passed near that group, she stopped. Because Cecily stopped. Something in her face changed. That bright, prepared smile fell away. Something else emerged beneath it. Cold, sharp, deliberate. And this shift was not directed at Vivian, not at her passing with the tray, not at her presence, not at the mask. But the reason was Vivian. One of the women in the group had asked Cecily something in a whisper, but Vivian had heard it. Who is that masked servant? She looks rather strange. Cecily turned. Looked at Vivian, directly, openly, so that everyone could see. Those blue eyes no longer held the flat morning expression. There was something sharp now. Intentional. Cold. "Oh, Eliza?" Cecily said. Her voice was sweet, like Lady Pemberton's sweetness, but with something different beneath. Sharper. More aware. Poor girl. Her face was damaged from an illness she had as a child. No parents, all alone. We took pity on her. What can one do? She has to work somewhere. She paused. Then, raising her voice slightly, as if not explaining but displaying. Of course, working in a normal household would be difficult. Her appearance unsettles people. But we are not overly sensitive. Now she moves about with that mask, which I suppose is a solution. The group laughed. Politely, but they laughed. A few glances turned toward Vivian, curiosity, pity, and that heavier thing, discomfort. Because Cecily was both presenting and erasing a person at the same time. Vivian was there, but not spoken to, spoken about. She existed, but only as something to be used. And the worst part was this: Cecily was smiling as she said it. That full, bright, socially approved smile. As if she were doing something kind. As if describing a pitiful servant were an act of generosity. Vivian held the tray. Kept her hands steady. Her face, the real one behind the mask, revealed nothing. Because revealing anything here was the most expensive thing of all. She bowed. "Excuse me, Miss Wyndham." And passed. When she reached the corridor, she counted her steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the corner. Turned. Stopped. She leaned the tray against the wall. Let her hands fall to her sides. Took a breath, deep, slow, without allowing what was inside her to spill out. What did she feel? Anger? Yes, but it was a familiar anger, an expected one. What Cecily had said was false, but more importantly, it was deliberate. This had not been spontaneous. Something had been building each time Cecily saw her, perhaps not jealousy, but discomfort. The Duke's glances. Those eyes drifting toward the masked servant. Cecily had noticed. And this humiliation was her response. But deeper than that, heavier than that, was this woman's family had destroyed her father. No, not her father himself, but his name, his legacy, everything he had left to his daughter. And now that daughter was being displayed in their own drawing room, before 20 people, as a pitiful object. Vivian swallowed it. Because she had to. Because it was not yet time. Because in this house, anger was not a weapon, it was a burden. And burdens slow a person down. But one day she would release that anger. And when that day came, she would not hold anger alone, but truth. Truth was always stronger than anger. She picked up the tray. Returned. Continued serving. But the drawing room gave her something else that night. After Cecily's words, when Vivian re-entered, her tray empty, heading toward the kitchen to refill, but pausing for a moment at the doorway, something caught her attention inside. Aldrich had heard that conversation. How did Vivian know? Because when Cecily had spoken, the Duke had not been across the room. He had been nearby. Speaking with a guest, but facing that direction. Within hearing distance. And when Vivian stepped back into the room, Aldrich's eyes found her. This time, the look was not quick, it was longer, deliberate, holding something clear within it. Was it anger? No, not quite. More, discomfort. Deep, real, not easily concealed. Cecily came to his side, took his arm, whispered something. Aldrich turned. Said yes, or made some gesture of agreement. But before leaving, his eyes shifted once more. Toward the door. Toward Vivian. And in that final, brief glance, sliding toward the corridor, Vivian saw something. The man wanted to apologize. Not for himself, for Cecily. But a duke did not apologize to a servant. That was how this world worked. So he looked. Only looked. Vivian took that look. Placed it somewhere, not dangerous, but important. Then carried the tray back to the kitchen. Late that night, after the last guests had left, the servants began to clean. As Vivian gathered glasses, she came to the corner where Cecily had been speaking. She straightened the chairs. Saw something on the floor, a small folded piece of paper, as though it had fallen from someone's pocket or been a note. She bent. Picked it up. Opened it. A single line, written in hurried, uneven handwriting. Witness, H. Morse, 14 Whitfield Street. Ill kept quiet. Vivian froze for a second. H. Morse. The witness. Kept quiet. This was the man whose signature had been used to invalidate the will. Vivian had searched for his name and failed to find it. Harold Morse. And here it was. 14 Whitfield Street. Ill kept quiet. Whose pocket had this fallen from? Lord Wyndham's? A guest's? Or, and this thought stopped her, had it been left intentionally? No. That was too complex. It had fallen. Coincidence, or carelessness. Powerful men were sometimes careless, because they believed no one would notice. Servants did not see. Or were not believed to. But Vivian had seen. She folded the paper. Slipped it into her apron pocket. Continued cleaning, as if nothing had happened, as if she held the most ordinary thing in the world. But something inside her had shifted. That night, Vivian, who had been diminished by Cecily's words, turned into an object before the room, now held something in her hand. Small, wrinkled, ink-stained. But it was real. And truths, no matter how small, opened the door to larger things. When she returned to her room, she removed the mask. Looked at herself in the mirror. Her father's eyes looked back at her, dark, deep, always searching for something. She had always loved those eyes. Because they never looked idly, they were always searching, somewhere, for something. Now it was as if those eyes were searching for her. Or she was searching for herself through them. H. Morse, she whispered. 14 Whitfield Street. Ill kept quiet. But alive, because if he were dead, the note would have said so differently. He was alive, somewhere on that street, holding this secret. Vivian had to reach him. But how? The only time she could leave the house was during servant leave, once a week, Sunday afternoons. And how far was Whitfield Street from the Wyndham house? Walking distance. She calculated, 15, perhaps 20 minutes. Sunday was 4 days away. Vivian burned the paper in the fireplace, as she always did. But before it burned, she read it twice. Until she memorized the address. Then she extinguished the candle. Lay down. That night, two things remained in her mind, Cecily's smile, and Aldrich's final look. Neither brought her sleep. Each for different reasons. The first was anger. The second, she did not yet know. But she would think of it again the next night. And the next. Until Sunday. Because some looks cannot be extinguished, no matter how one tries. On Sunday morning, London woke differently. It was not like the noisy, hurried mornings of the week. Slower, the streets less crowded, carriage sounds more distant, even the air carried a different weight, as if the city itself were taking a breath. Vivian liked these mornings. But this Sunday, she stepped out not for pleasure, but for purpose. Leave began at 2, until 7 in the evening. 5 hours. Enough, to go to Whitfield Street and return, and, if H. Morse opened the door, to speak. As she stepped out of the Wyndham house, the head housemaid called after her. "Eliza. Be back by 7. "Yes, Mrs. Holt." The door closed. Vivian stepped into the street. The air was cold, the sharp cold of October, the kind that made breath visible. She closed the collar of her coat. The mask remained, because the masked servant of Wyndham had to remain masked outside as well. The identity had to be consistent. But the mask drew less attention than she had expected. In London's crowds, everyone minded their own business. She began to walk. Whitfield Street was 17 minutes from the Wyndham house, Vivian counted. A narrow, long, cobbled street. Tight houses on either side, small shops at ground level, curtained windows above. Number 14 was easy to find, the paint on the door was peeling, the steps worn, but the building stood. 3 stories, narrow. Vivian knocked. Waited. A sound came from inside, slow steps, then a cough, then the door opened slightly. An old man looked out, nearly 80, white-haired, pale eyes, but something still there within them. Intelligence? Fear? The two often sat close together. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was thin, whether from illness, age, or long silence, it was hard to tell. Vivian was prepared. But that preparation dissolved the moment the door opened, because this was the man. The witness. The one who had allowed, or been made to allow, a false signature upon her father's will. She took a deep breath. Then, calmly, evenly. "I'm looking for Harold Morse. If that is you, I am Sir Edmund Ashford's daughter." The man froze. The door did not close. But it did not open further either. It remained, there, between two worlds. Then the man stepped back. Opened the door fully. "Come in," he said. The room was small and warm, there were embers in the fireplace, a pot resting above them. Vivian sat. The man took a seat across from her, slowly, carefully, like someone who considered every movement. For a while, he simply looked at her. Not at the mask, at her eyes. And Vivian thought, he is searching for her face. Trying to recognize Ashford's daughter. "You resemble your father," he said at last. "Your eyes." Something tightened inside Vivian. But her voice remained even. "I have been looking for you. For a long time." The man lowered his head. His hands rested on his knees, old, trembling hands. "I know. I know I've been searched for." He paused. "They know it too. The Wyndham family." At the name, the man flinched, a small, almost imperceptible reaction. But Vivian saw it. "Yes," he said. "Them." Then he spoke, slowly, halting at times, circling back occasionally. But he spoke. Harold Morse had worked 10 years earlier as a clerk in a small legal office handling Lord Wyndham's affairs. Reginald Ashford was one of Lord Wyndham's oldest associates, their arrangement went back years. After Sir Edmund's death, when the matter of the will arose, Morse's name had been used as a witness, someone who had allegedly testified that Edmund had altered his will while still alive. "I did not sign it," Morse said. His voice trembled, but his eyes did not. He was telling the truth. "I never even saw that paper. My name was used. And they told me, if I spoke, if I said anything." He stopped. "What did they say?" Vivian asked. Her voice was low, but something tightened within it. This man had been threatened. An old, ill, isolated man, silenced. "I have a son," Morse said. "In Bristol. He runs a small business. They said, if I spoke, that business would end. And worse things could follow." Silence. In that silence, Vivian felt several things at once: anger, cold, sharp, familiar. Pity. This man was not exactly guilty, but another layer of victim. And resolve, because this confession, if written down and signed, might not stand alone in court, but it was a beginning. "If," Vivian said carefully, "if I could protect your son, if I could take this testimony somewhere safe, would you testify?" Morse looked at her for a long time. Then, "Before I die, I want to tell one truth. I owe your father that. I knew him. He was a good man." His eyes filled. But he did not cry. "Yes," he said. "I will testify." When Vivian stepped outside, the light was fading. Street lamps had begun to glow, yellow, flickering, that old London light. She walked for a while, then stopped. Leaned against a wall. Her hands were trembling now, outside, alone. What she had held inside, wanted to come out once the door had closed. Morse would testify. This was the result of 4 weeks, of the mask, of being Eliza, of every bow, of Cecily's words. It was not yet enough, but the door had opened. And open doors invite entry. But she also thought this: if I could take this somewhere safe, she had said. And in that moment, a wrong door had been knocked. Aldrich Vane. The only man in that house who could tell Lord Wyndham that closed matters are not necessarily right. But he would become Wyndham's son-in-law. He would be bound to their wealth. Sit beside her enemy. He could not be trusted. He must not be trusted. And yet that door kept knocking. And Vivian did not yet fully understand why. She began walking. She had to return to the Wyndham house. It was past 6, less than an hour until 7. As she left the narrow street and stepped onto the main road, she quickened her pace. Morse's voice echoed in her mind: "You resemble your father. Your eyes." Her father's eyes. Always those eyes. Vivian lifted her chin. Walked. When she turned the corner, she stopped. Because standing directly ahead of her, in the middle of the road leading from Whitfield Street back toward Wyndham, was a man. Aldrich Vane. He was alone, no valet, no escort. Wearing a dark coat, hands behind his back, looking down the street, but when Vivian stepped out, he turned. And saw her. They looked at each other. Vivian's first instinct was to bow, reflexive, Eliza's instinct. But she did not. Because this was outside the house. And here, in the street, neither of them was entirely within their role. Aldrich stepped forward. His voice was low, but the street was quiet. He did not lower it to be heard. He lowered it for another reason. "What are you doing on this street?" Vivian measured. 1 second, 2. Then. "It is my day of leave, my lord. I visited an acquaintance. Whitfield Street, number 14. Vivian froze. He knew the address. This was too much. This was not coincidence, or something far beyond it. "I did not follow you," Aldrich said, as if reading her thought. His tone was steady, not defensive. "I knew that address. For a different reason." Vivian looked at him. He was not lying. How did she know? She didn't. But on his face, that controlled, cold face, there was something: discomfort. Deep, real, conflicted. For what reason? Vivian asked. And the question, too direct, not fitting for Eliza, spoken not as a servant but as a person, once it left her mouth, could not be taken back. Aldrich looked at her. Long, careful. Not at the mask, as always, at her eyes. Because I have been investigating as well, he said. The Ashford matter. The street was silent. A carriage passed in the distance, quick, leaving dust behind. Then silence again. Inside Vivian, a storm. Outside, nothing. Her face was still, her hands at her sides, her feet grounded. What held her there was something she had built over the past weeks: swallow everything first, think after. Why? She asked. Her voice was low, but something trembled within it, anger, caution, or something else, she did not yet know. Aldrich paused. Then, like a man who had asked himself that question many times, but only now found an answer. Because before this engagement with the Wyndham family was arranged, my lawyer told me something. He said Reginald Ashford stands to gain from this marriage, and that gain rests on something unlawful. I asked Wellington. He said the matter was closed. I could not leave it closed. He paused. There was a girl, Sir Edmund's daughter. She had been driven into the streets. Disappeared. No one was looking for her. I could not accept that. Something inside Vivian, something long carried, unnamed, considered dangerous, shifted differently this time. Because this man had been searching for her. Vivian Ashford. Not Eliza. And before finding her, he had come to this street. But he did not yet know who she was. Or did he? Vivian looked at him. Directly, through the mask, with her eyes. What do you think of the masked servant in the Wyndham household? She asked. Her voice was flat, dangerously flat. Aldrich's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, very slowly, very carefully. I think, he said, that this servant is not masked because she wishes to hide from being seen. Silence. And I think, he continued, his voice even lower, that the person I have been searching for these past 2 weeks may have been walking the corridors of that house every morning. Vivian did not respond. Because responding, whether to confirm or deny, was not the right move. He had said what he had to say. And what he had said was true. But truth did not make him trustworthy. Aldrich Vane was investigating the Ashford matter. He was engaged to the Wyndham family, yet did not trust them. And now he stood here, at the edge of Whitfield Street, alone, telling a masked servant she might be the one he had been searching for. Was this good? Bad? It could be both. Because if this man had truly found Vivian, if he knew, or suspected her identity, then he had 2 options: tell the Wyndham family or remain silent. The first would end everything. The second, what would it lead to? She did not know. And surrendering to what she did not know was not something Vivian did. Should you not return to your household, my lord? She said. Her voice was polite, Eliza's voice, not Vivian's. But her eyes were not Eliza's. Aldrich looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, something passed across his face. Not disappointment, but close to it. Perhaps he understood. Perhaps he felt the door closing. Yes, he said. I should. He passed her. Along the pavement, moving away. Vivian did not look back. But she heard his footsteps, slow, thoughtful, unhurried. Then he turned the corner and disappeared. Vivian entered the Wyndham house at 6:49. Mrs. Holt was waiting at the door. Where have you been so long? I found the road longer than expected, Mrs. Holt. I apologize. The woman said nothing. Let her pass. Vivian went upstairs, entered her room, closed the door. She removed the mask. Looked at herself in the mirror. Two things had happened that day. Morse would testify, that was the first. And Aldrich Vane might know who she was, that was the second. The first was hope. The second stood at the very center of danger. Vivian held both in her mind. Tried to weigh them. But the balance did not settle, because Aldrich's final words, "The person I have been searching for," had not felt like a threat. Nor like a warning. More like recognition. Vivian tried to erase the word from her mind. She partially succeeded. But that night, as she held the mask in her hand, she realized something. For the first time since entering the Wyndham house, she wanted to remove it. Not only in her room, but outside. To stand with her real name, her real face, fully as herself. It was not yet time. But this desire, this new, dangerous, beautiful desire, had not existed before. And Vivian, being an honest person, knew exactly when it had begun. Under the street lamp, at the edge of Whitfield Street, when a man had said, "The person I have been searching for these past 2 weeks." She set the mask down. Lay down. Closed her eyes. She tried to sleep. It took a long time. The next morning, the Wyndham household woke at its usual hour. Curtains were drawn, fireplaces lit, the kitchen filled with noise. Vivian began her duties early, after a sleepless night. Remaining in bed served no purpose but thinking, and thinking was dangerous this morning. Keeping her hands occupied was safer. She opened the windows on the first floor. Swept the corridor. Checked the flowers, replaced those that had wilted. All the while, one corner of her mind kept circling back to the night before. To Aldrich's words. "The one I have been searching for these past 2 weeks." What would she do this morning? What should she do? There were 2 options. The first, ignore Aldrich Vane, hold tightly to the Eliza identity, continue her own path. She had Morse's testimony, that was enough for a beginning. She needed a lawyer, money, time. None of those required Aldrich. The second, open that door. Speak. Take the risk. As Vivian weighed these options, she heard his voice from the corner of the corridor. Aldrich was passing with Lord Wyndham, both early risers. Lord Wyndham laughed at something, Aldrich responded politely. Vivian paused. Held her broom. Wanted to ignore them. But Aldrich's eyes found her, a single second, quick, unnoticed by anyone else. And there was something in that look. In the cold of the morning, beside Lord Wyndham, in that precise moment, he was saying something to her. Without words. But real. Wait. Vivian continued sweeping. The waiting lasted until noon. In the afternoon, Vivian had been assigned to arrange the library, dusting shelves, straightening books, opening the window. The Wyndham library was not small, but neglected, as though no one truly used it. Vivian had noticed this before. Lord Wyndham did not read, the room existed more for display. As she wiped the shelves, the door opened. Aldrich entered. He closed the door, not fully, leaving it slightly ajar. It was a deliberate choice. Fully closed would invite suspicion, fully open as well. Half open was the balance between. Vivian did not lower the cloth. But she stopped. He walked to the shelves. Took a book, randomly, its identity irrelevant. Opened it. Then, as if reading, but speaking to her, in a low voice. "I thought about last night." "So did I," Vivian said. She should not have, but she did. Because lying, at this point, was more dangerous. Aldrich turned a page. "I did not intend to frighten you." I was not frightened. I know. A brief pause. That is what caught my attention. Vivian placed the cloth on the shelf. Turned, not fully, just enough. Enough to look at him. What do you want from me? She said. This was not Eliza's voice. But in this room, in this library, at that half-open door, being Eliza was no longer possible. Aldrich closed the book. Placed it back. Turned, fully this time. I want the truth, he said. The truth of the Ashford matter. And for that, I need you, because you are far deeper inside this than I am. Vivian watched him. Long, careful, measuring. I am a servant, my lord. No, Aldrich said. Calm, but certain. You are not. And we both know it. Silence. Within that silence, Vivian made a decision. Not a full one, not to reveal everything, but to open a door slightly. Because this man was either an ally or an enemy. And the only way to know was to step forward. Why are you investigating the Ashford matter? Vivian asked. Truly. Tell me honestly. Aldrich looked at her for a moment. Then, like someone who had asked himself this question many times. Because this engagement was not my choice. My family arranged it, Wyndham wealth, connections, Cecily's social position. The appropriate criteria for a duke's match. I accepted. Because I had no strong reason to refuse. He paused. Looked toward the window, the garden beyond, pale with October's fading colors. But then my lawyer came. He told me that part of this family's wealth had grown suddenly over the past 2 years. And that the source of that growth was not clean. The Ashford estate is part of it. Vivian listened. Every word. I did not want to become part of a fortune built on the theft of a man's inheritance. It is that simple. For a moment, Vivian saw him differently, not his title, but what was inside him. A man without the courage to refuse, but with a conscience. The two could coexist. And that did not make him less flawed, only more real. That estate, Vivian said, her voice lowering, was mine. The room stilled. Nothing changed on Aldrich's face, but his eyes did. Something settled there. Not surprise, confirmation. A heavy certainty. Vivian Ashford, he said. Not just a name, a recognition. Yes, Vivian said. For the first time, she had spoken her name, within this house, within this masked identity, knowing the weight it carried. And saying it felt different than she had expected. Lighter. As though part of the burden dissolved within the word itself. Aldrich stepped forward slightly. Leaned against the shelf, still keeping distance, but no longer withdrawn. How long have you been here? 20 days. And in that time, what have you found? Vivian measured him. To give this information, this was irreversible. But after Whitfield Street, she had understood something. She could not complete this alone. Morse's testimony existed, but it needed a voice, a name, a force to carry it. Vivian Ashford's voice alone was not enough in this society. But Duke Aldrich Vane's voice, that was different. She spoke. Not everything, not yet. But the important parts, the note in the household ledger, H. Morse, the promise of testimony. And her uncle's role, Reginald Ashford as the intermediary, or perhaps the instrument. Aldrich listened. Did not interrupt. Did not comment, until she finished. Then. Wyndham is the architect, he said. Reginald Ashford is the instrument. Because Reginald alone could not construct such a plan, he lacks both wealth and connections. Wyndham used his greed. In return, he gained a share of the estate, or something else. As Vivian heard this, something inside her both collapsed and settled into place. Because it meant this, the Wyndham family was not merely complicit. They were the planners. And when Vivian had come to this house, she had come to the right place, but had not fully understood why. She had suspected them. But she had not seen them as the core of it. Now she did. And with that realization came something else, heavy, unavoidable. Vivian had judged this family. Correctly, they were guilty. But within that judgment, she had seen everything through suspicion. Her fellow servants. Lady Wyndham's anxious glances. Anne. Aldrich. From the beginning, she had seen him as part of them. Because he sat beside them. Because he was to marry into them. She had read his looks as danger. Considered Whitfield Street a possible trap. But he had been investigating this before her. Searching for Vivian Ashford, the lost daughter, driven into the streets, unclaimed. And doing so despite Wyndham. Vivian had miscalculated. She had found the guilty family correctly, but had placed the one innocent man among them with the guilty. It hurt. Because for someone who had suffered injustice, to commit injustice toward another, this was the hardest kind of error to accept. "I misjudged you," Vivian said. Directly. Aldrich looked at her. "In this house, I assumed everyone was an enemy. Including you." Aldrich was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a small, genuine laugh, brief, real, slipping past that controlled exterior. "A reasonable assumption," he said. "In this house. Under these conditions. But it was wrong." "Yes. It was." His tone softened, only slightly, but noticeably. "But to be mistaken, in such a situation, in such isolation, that is forgivable." When Vivian heard this, something inside her, something long carried, unnamed, considered dangerous, did not retreat this time. It stayed. Because this man did not judge her. Did not diminish her mistake. He simply saw it. And in this story, being seen was the most valuable thing. Vivian walked to the window. Looked out at the garden, yellowing leaves, pale sunlight, the melancholic beauty of October. "What do we do now?" she said. "We have Morse's testimony. The note in the ledger. But these are not enough on their own. We need a lawyer, a case, Anne. And someone to protect you during that process," Aldrich said. "Because when Wyndham realizes this is surfacing, and he will, you will be the first target. I know. You may need to leave this house. Quickly. I know that as well." Vivian turned. Looked at him, directly, through the mask, with her eyes. "But before I leave, I need one more thing. Wyndham's study. There is something there, a locked drawer he checks every morning. I don't know what is inside. But something that can support Morse's testimony, a document, correspondence, something, must be there." Aldrich looked at her. Long, calculating. "The key is always on Lord Wyndham." "I know." "Then how?" "I don't know yet," Vivian said. "But I will find a way." And when she said it, her voice was different, not Eliza's, but Vivian Ashford's. Whole. Unmasked. And when Aldrich heard that voice, something shifted in his expression, small, but real. Admiration, perhaps. Respect. Something not easily named. But Vivian saw it. And this time, she did not turn away. A sound came through the half-open door, Mrs. Holt's voice, speaking to someone in the corridor. They both stopped at the same moment. Aldrich picked up the book again, this time as if he were truly holding it. Vivian took the cloth back in her hand, turned toward the shelf. The movements were quick, silent, practiced, like two people sensing the same danger at once. The voices faded. The corridor fell silent again. Aldrich placed the book back on the shelf. Walked toward the door. Stopped, at the threshold, not turning, but speaking over his shoulder. Wyndham is leaving London this Friday. One night, perhaps two. Lady Wyndham and Cecily will go with him, family visit. Vivian's hand stilled. The house will be largely empty then, he continued. The servants will remain, but no one from the family. And I will not be here that night. He paused. Then, very quietly. I do not know how you will find the key. But if you do, then that night, that room will be open to you. He left. Gone. Vivian continued wiping the shelf. Her hands steady. Her breathing even. From the outside, nothing had happened, a masked servant dusting the library shelves. Ordinary. Invisible. Insignificant. But inside, everything was moving. Friday. 3 days. And Lord Wyndham's key, the one he checked every morning, never separated from. How would she take it? Not by force, that would end everything. Not by trickery, that would leave traces. Then how? Vivian set the question aside. There was something else for now, more immediate, more difficult to face. Aldrich Vane trusted her. Trusted someone who lived in this house, who could see everything. And Vivian wanted to deserve that trust. Not only for the plan, this realization was uncomfortable, but honest. She wanted to deserve it for herself. That was dangerous. And Vivian knew it. But knowing was not always enough to stop it. She spent the rest of the afternoon fulfilling her duties, the kitchen, the corridors, preparations for dinner. Everything was normal. Everything was Eliza. But that evening, as Cecily came downstairs, she stopped in the corridor and looked at Vivian, brief, assessing. Those blue eyes carried the same calculated expression as in the morning. Eliza, she said. Miss Wyndham. The Duke was in the library today. You were there as well. Not a question. A statement. Vivian looked at her. Her face was neutral. I was dusting the shelves, Mississippi. It was my duty. Cecily watched her for a second. At her mask, then her eyes, then back to the mask. Then turned. Walked away. But the final glance she cast over her shoulder, that glance was a warning. Wordless, politely wrapped, but unmistakable. I am watching you. That night, in her room, Vivian thought about the key. Lord Wyndham always carried it, left pocket of his coat. She had noticed this, each morning before entering the study, he touched his left side. A small, unconscious habit. The key was there. Taking it from him was impossible. But... Vivian paused. The coat. The left pocket. Every morning, Lord Wyndham came downstairs early, but he always hung his coat on the hook beside the study door before entering. Because inside, the fire was lit, the room warm, and he had made a habit of removing it. The key was in that pocket. And the coat would hang there, for at least 10 minutes, until he settled inside. 10 minutes. It was enough. But taking the key was not enough, she needed a copy. And for that, a locksmith, or... Vivian thought of her father's house. His library. And on the top shelf, something he had once kept out of curiosity, lock molds. Pressed into wax, replicated. Something he had shown her like a child's trick. Wax. There were candles in every room of this house. Vivian stood, took a small candle from her holder, looked at it in her palm, then at the door. Friday was 3 days away. It was enough. She removed the mask, looked at herself in the mirror. This time, she saw something different. In previous nights, she had seen only herself, her father's eyes, the lost name, the weight she carried. But tonight, for the first time, there was something else. Small, new, not yet fully formed. Hope? Perhaps. Or the first breath of it, not yet filling the lungs, but opening the door. And beside it, because she had to be honest with herself, there was something else. That conversation in the library. Aldrich's voice. To be mistaken, in such a situation, is forgivable. Friday morning, the Wyndham household filled with luggage. Lady Wyndham rose early, as she always did before a journey, ensuring everything was in place. Cecily remained in her room while her maid packed. Lord Wyndham was in his study, closing things, locking them, placing them in his pocket. Vivian saw this, having positioned herself precisely. The key was there. Left pocket. As always. Vivian had prepared since early that morning. For 3 days, she had studied Lord Wyndham's routine, unchanged each day. He came downstairs, hung his coat, entered the study. 12 minutes. Always the same. That morning, Vivian waited in the corridor. Tray in hand, invisible, routine. Lord Wyndham descended, hung his coat, entered. The door closed. Vivian took 10 steps forward. Stopped. No one in the corridor. She reached for the coat. Left pocket. Her fingers found it, cold metal, small, flat-edged key. She took it out. Looked at it in her palm. 1 second, only one. Then she took the candle from her apron pocket. Using the method her father had taught her, pressed the key into the wax, both sides. A clean imprint. Quick. Precise. She returned the key to the pocket. Hid the wax again. Stepped back. Turned the corner with her tray. Her heart was racing, no one could see it, but inside, it pounded like a drum. Because this was irreversible. The mold had been made. That night, the key would be crafted. And that key would enter the lock of the study. What if there was nothing inside? Then everything would end. This identity, this mask, these 20 days, wasted. But if there was something? Vivian did not finish the thought. Not yet. In the afternoon, the family departed. Lady Wyndham gave final instructions to Mrs. Holt, who would do what, which rooms would be cleaned, what must be ready by Monday. Lord Wyndham stood by the carriage, checking his watch. Cecily paused as she stepped out, at the threshold, turning. Her eyes searched for Vivian. Found her. Vivian stood at the bottom of the stairs. Cecily looked at her, long, silent, those cold blue eyes. Then she smiled. That full, bright, socially adored smile. "Good evening, Eliza," she said. And entered the carriage. Within that smile, Vivian saw something, not a warning, not a threat. Worse, certainty. As if Cecily knew something would happen. And took pleasure in knowing it. That look stopped Vivian. Because Cecily's smile, that calculated, assured, beautiful smile, was not random. This woman was watching her. Had she noticed the library conversation? Had she counted Aldrich's glances long before? And if so, if Cecily knew something, then Friday night might not be an opportunity, but a trap. But they had left. The carriage was gone. And Vivian thought, if I hesitate now, I surrender everything to chance. She would continue. Carefully. At 11 that night, the house fell silent. The servants had withdrawn. After a long day, they were released earlier. The final sounds from the kitchen faded. Corridor lamps were extinguished. The Wyndham house sank into darkness. Vivian waited another hour. Until midnight. In that hour, she sat in her room, masked, coat on, ready. In her hand was the key she had completed that day, cast from the wax mold, rough but functional. She had taken it to a locksmith that afternoon. During her leave, 10 minutes was enough. The man had asked no questions. In London, when certain locksmiths were paid certain sums, questions were not asked. At midnight, she rose. Opened the door slightly. Stepped into the corridor. The house felt as if it were not breathing. That was how large houses felt in such silence. Every step, every creak of wood, every breath felt too loud. Vivian walked slowly. Descended the stairs. Reached the first floor. The study stood at the end of the long corridor, oak door, solid. She took out the key. Inserted it into the lock. Turned. Click. The door opened. She stepped inside. Closed it behind her, not fully, leaving a narrow gap. Lit her small lantern, prepared earlier, using a spark from the fireplace. The room was larger than she had expected. A wide desk, papers scattered across it, writing instruments, a glass. Shelves along the walls, not books, but files, folders. And in the corner, beside the desk, a locked drawer. A single drawer, distinct from the others, secured with its own lock. Vivian first turned to the papers on the desk, quickly, methodically. Accounts, correspondence, trade documents. Most were technical, requiring time to understand. But she saw an envelope, unsealed, open, containing several handwritten pages. She took it. Began to read. It was a letter addressed to Reginald Ashford, dated 4 months prior. Written in Lord Wyndham's own hand. And inside, it contained the following. A plan. Clear, detailed, a plan documenting the agreement between them. Reginald would prepare the legal grounds to invalidate Edmund's will. Morse's signature would be used for this. The man had been persuaded. In return, Lord Wyndham would transfer 30% of the Ashford estate to Reginald. The rest would remain with Wyndham. Once Cecily and Aldrich's engagement was completed and their fortunes merged, the Ashford estate would become part of the Wyndham wealth. No one would notice. A small country estate would disappear within a greater fortune. And in the final paragraph, the part that made Vivian's hands tremble, it read. The girl matter, if she emerges, her credibility must be prepared to be questionable. Reginald will handle this. The girl matter. Vivian lingered on those 2 words for a moment. On the paper, in those small, bureaucratic words, she saw her entire life, reduced to a problem, an item to be handled. The only thing her father had left behind, his daughter, had been compressed into the final paragraph of a letter. Anger came. Cold, deep, rooted. But this time she did not swallow it, she let it rise. For 1 second, just one, she felt it fully. Then she folded the paper. Slipped it into her apron. It was enough. With this letter, together with Morse's testimony, no court could ignore it. She moved to the drawer. The key did not fit this lock, it was a different one. Vivian paused. Looked at it. Forcing it would leave marks. She had already found the letter. That was enough. She extinguished the lantern. Walked to the door. Opened it. Stepped into the corridor. locked it behind her. And when she turned, Cecily Wyndham stood at the far end of the corridor. In her coat, with her travel case, a woman who had returned home at midnight. A footman stood beside her, holding a lamp. They looked at each other. That smile was gone from Cecily's face. There, in that dark corridor, she was off stage, and off stage, Cecily Wyndham looked entirely different. Cold. Calculating. And now, dangerous. "What are you doing here?" she said. Her voice was low, but it carried the stillness of a storm about to break. In a single second, Vivian calculated. Denial was impossible. She had just stepped out of the study at midnight. Eliza's innocence could not salvage this picture. And Cecily knew it. That smile, "Good night, Eliza," had been for this moment. This woman had returned. Deliberately. It was a trap. Vivian touched the mask. That small porcelain piece. And inside her, something decided, quickly, irreversibly. She removed it. Cecily's eyes widened. For the first time, real shock broke through that controlled face. The face before her was perfect. Unmarked. And that perfection was more startling than the mask, more than the story. "You," Cecily began. "Vivian Ashford," she said. Her voice was level. Fearless, or rather, the fear was there, but it stood behind her, not before. "Daughter of Sir Edmund Ashford. The rightful owner of the estate your father and my uncle stole." Silence. Cecily stepped forward. Her eyes remained fixed on that face, the real one, not the mask. And something shifted within them, from surprise, to calculation, from calculation to danger. "Footman," she said, without changing tone, "go. Wake Mr. Collins. Now." Mr. Collins, the house's security officer. Vivian knew this. The footman left. The corridor was theirs. "What do you have?" Cecily asked. Her gaze dropped to the apron, to where the paper lay. This woman was intelligent. She had always been intelligent. She had simply chosen the wrong purposes for it. "A letter in your father's hand," Vivian said. "To my uncle. Explaining how the will was invalidated, how the witness was silenced, and how the estate was divided." Cecily's face turned to stone. "Give me that letter." "No. I will pay you well." "Very well for your silence." Vivian laughed, short, real, bitter. "My father did not stay silent for money. Neither will I." Cecily stepped closer. "Then when morning comes, you will be accused of theft. Of unlawful entry. A masked servant, deceiving this house under a false identity. Who will believe you? The fiancée of a duke, or a girl from the street, hiding her face?" It was a correct calculation. Vivian knew it. In the eyes of society, this picture would tilt in Cecily's favor: powerful family, powerful name, powerful engagement. And Vivian, alone, with only a letter. But she was not alone. Footsteps came from the other end of the corridor. Cecily turned. Mr. Collins stood there, early. But those footsteps were not his. Longer, heavier, more familiar. Aldrich Vane stepped into the corridor. In his coat, as if he had never left, or had returned. That question Vivian would ask later. Now she only saw this: he was there. And when his controlled face took in the scene, Cecily, Vivian, and Vivian's unmasked face, something shifted. He stopped. He looked at Vivian, unmasked, real, in the corridor's lamplight. And in that look, that long, singular look, Vivian saw something: recognition. Not merely of who she was, but something deeper, more interior. As if everything he had seen in the mask over the past weeks was now confirmed in the face. Then he turned to Cecily. His voice was cold, that familiar cold that could freeze a room. "Cecily. Aldrich, this woman." "This woman," he said, without raising his voice, "is the daughter of Sir Edmund Ashford. And, as I understand it, she is carrying a letter written by your father." Cecily froze. "You will leave this house, Cecily," Aldrich said. Still cold, still controlled. "Now. Take your servant, go to your room. Nothing happened in this corridor tonight. You cannot give me orders. Not yet. But understand this." He stepped forward. His voice lowered, but its weight deepened. "If that letter goes to a court, and it will, your name will be in it as well. Because you are part of this family. And in this society, a family's crime stains its children. You know that." Cecily calculated, quickly, sharply. Then, without a word, she turned and left. Her footsteps receded. The sound of the stairs, a door closing. Vivian and Aldrich remained. Silence. Aldrich turned. Looked at her, differently now. The danger had passed, Cecily was gone, the corridor empty. And in that strange midnight light, two people stood facing one another. Vivian still held the mask in her hand. She had not put it back on. Because, and this surprised her, she did not want to. Not before him. Not in this moment. "You returned," she said. "I did not leave," Aldrich replied. "I moved. But I did not abandon the house." Vivian looked at him. "To protect me?" Aldrich did not answer immediately. Then, that voice, always measured, always controlled, now from somewhere deeper. "To protect you." Yes. When Vivian heard that, something she had carried for a long time, something dangerous, unnamed, something she had tried to extinguish every night, settled fully into place. It did not retreat. It did not fade. It remained. She looked at the mask in her hand. Then at him. "I have the letter," she said. "We have Morse's testimony. And now. Now you must leave this house," Aldrich said. "Tonight. Cecily will call her father in the morning. When Lord Wyndham returns, you cannot be here." Vivian knew this. "Where will I go?" "My lawyer," he said. "We will go together in the morning. The letter, Morse's testimony, and my statement, together, they are enough to move a court." "Your statement," she said slowly. "That means ending the engagement." "I know. It means severing all ties with the Wyndham family." "I know. Part of society will turn against you. For leaving Cecily. For turning on her family." Aldrich stepped closer. Looked at her, directly, unmasked, the kind of look he gave very few people in his life. "Vivian Ashford," he said, her name now something familiar on his tongue, "I did not think of you when making this decision. I thought of what is right. And what is right weighs more than the silence of this society." She studied him for a moment. Then asked, something she had not dared ask herself until that night. "Do you know why I should trust you?" Aldrich smiled, brief, real. "You do not. But I am willing to wait." Vivian inclined her head. Then lifted it. "I will be ready in 5 minutes." She went to her room. Took her small bag, inside, a few things left from her father, letters, and a miniature she had kept from the first day. Her father's portrait. Always with her. She looked around the room one last time. For 20 days, this had been the place where she removed her mask each night. Small. Cold. Solitary. But something had grown there, a plan, courage, and something she had been afraid to name. She placed the mask on the table. Left it. Took her bag. Walked to the door. Turned, once, for the last time. The night lamp flickered over the mask, light striking the white porcelain face, empty. Vivian Ashford left Eliza's mask there, on that table, in that room. And went downstairs. London mornings began quickly. Vivian had forgotten that, or perhaps, within the locked, curtained, controlled days of the Wyndham house, the rhythm of the outside world had faded. But now, walking beside Aldrich through narrow streets toward the lawyer's office, the city's old weight met her again. Carriages, vendors, early workers, morning mist. Life was continuing, as it always had, as it always would. And that continuity, strangely, gave Vivian strength. As they walked, Aldrich was beside her, but at that familiar distance, close, yet never crowding. It was something Vivian had come to notice. He never came too near. Always near enough, yet far enough. It was respect. Not ordinary politeness, real, considered respect. "Did you sleep?" Aldrich asked. "No," Vivian said. "There was no point in lying." "Neither did I." A brief silence. Then Vivian. "Why did you come back?" "Truly." Aldrich took a few steps. Then. "I saw Cecily's smile. As she was getting into the carriage. I know that smile, she wears it when she is planning something. And that night, you were in that house, and I had left. That calculation disturbed me." Vivian looked at him. "You recognize Cecily's smiles. Engagement teaches certain things. Not all of them pleasant." There was much within that sentence, fatigue, clarity, and a trace of sorrow. Vivian heard it, and did not ask further. Some answers were longer than questions, and this morning, there was no time. The lawyer, Thomas Merritt, worked on the corner of Fleet Street, on the second floor of an old building. He had been Aldrich's lawyer for 10 years. And when Aldrich knocked on his door at 8 in the morning, with a young woman beside him, unmasked, bearing her true name, the man was not surprised. Not being surprised was one of a good lawyer's essential qualities. They entered. Merritt listened, at length, without interruption, taking notes. Vivian spoke, the Ashford estate, the will, Morse, the letter. Merritt read the letter. Twice. Then removed his glasses. "This is sufficient," he said. "With Morse's testimony, this is sufficient." When Vivian heard those words, "This is sufficient," something within her loosened. Something that had been held taut since her father's death, since the reading of the will. It loosened. Not entirely, not yet. But it began. "How long will it take?" she asked. "The court process," Merritt said, "will be long. The Wyndham family will resist, they have money, they have lawyers. But this letter, with its handwriting, its date, its contents, cannot be denied. Reginald Ashford will not withstand pressure. One will break, then the other." Aldrich leaned against the table. "I will testify as well. What Wyndham told me. Dates, conversations, my suspicions about the origin of the fortune." Merritt looked at him. Then at Vivian. Then back at Aldrich. And in that look, in that experienced face that had seen everything, there was a small but genuine respect. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin." The process, as Merritt had said, was long. But Vivian carried this length differently from the ones she had known before. Earlier waiting, after her mother's death, after her father's, after the will, had been borne alone. In darkness, without direction. This waiting was different. There were documents emerging from Merritt's office, there was Morse's trembling yet resolute signature, and there was a routine. Every Tuesday morning, Aldrich appeared outside the law office. Those Tuesday meetings began to change. At first, they spoke only of the case, documents, dates, possible objections. Then it became more. Vivian spoke of her father, his library, his Latin books, how he had taught her the candle and key trick. Aldrich listened. Truly listened. And one day, at the end of November, as they stepped out of the office, on the street. "I want to ask you something," Aldrich said. "Ask." "At Wyndham House, when you first saw me. What did you think?" Vivian laughed. Freely, genuinely, a sound never heard behind the mask. "An enemy," she said. "Certainly an enemy." Aldrich laughed as well. "Reasonable. And you? When you first saw me?" He walked a step. Stopped. Turned. "In the corridor. You were cleaning the window. Masked. And I thought, this person did not want to be in that room. Yet she was there despite it. That is a powerful thing." Vivian held his gaze. Long, calm, unmasked. Powerful? The strongest thing. In mid-December, the court ruling came. That morning, Vivian waited in Merritt's office with Aldrich. Outside, snow was falling, London's rare, quiet snow. She stood at the window. Behind her, Aldrich sat at the desk, reading something. And this scene, this ordinary, silent scene of two people in a room, had become what stayed most in Vivian's mind. Not the grand moments. These small, real ones. The door opened. Merritt entered. A document in his hand. He placed it on the table. Looked at Vivian. "The Ashford estate," he said, "has been legally restored to you. The Wyndham family has withdrawn all objections, on their lawyer's advice, as the letter was undeniable. Reginald Ashford will face a separate legal process. That will take time. But the estate is yours." Vivian looked at the document. Her name was on it, Vivian Ashford. Her name. Not in her own hand, but in the official script of the court. Yet it was hers. Complete, inscribed, irrevocable. What did she feel? She did not cry, she had not expected to. Because this happiness was not the ecstatic kind. It was heavier, more rooted. The weight of something earned, not given, but fought for, carried, waited for, and finally obtained. She took the document. Held it in her palm. "Thank you," she said to Merritt. Then she turned. Looked at Aldrich. He was sitting there, no longer reading. Watching her. And on his face, that face always controlled, always distant, she saw the clearest thing she had ever seen there, joy. Pure, unperformed, felt for another. When Vivian saw that joy, she finally gave a name to the thing she had carried for so long, unnamed, dangerous. Silently. To herself. But she named it. When they stepped outside, the snow had stopped. The streets were white, clean, new, as if the city had been washed. Vivian walked. Aldrich beside her. Neither spoke, but this silence was no longer the tense, measured silence of earlier weeks. It was an easy one. Two people speaking the same language without words. Then Aldrich stopped. Vivian stopped as well. Turned. He was looking at her unmasked face, her eyes. Always her eyes. And now, within that gaze, there was an open question, unhidden. "When you return to the Ashford estate," he said, "what will you do?" Vivian considered. First, I will restore the library. My uncle likely sold half the books. Then the garden. Then, she paused. Smiled, lightly. I do not know. I have thought only of this for so long. Not of what comes after. Would you like to think about what comes after? Vivian looked at him. There was another question within that one, clear, honest, without performance. Ask what you wish to ask, Aldrich. He paused for a second. Then, setting aside that controlled composure. I would like to spend time with you. After this case as well. Not in the corridor of a law office on Tuesday mornings, truly. I would like to speak. To see your library. Your father's books. A brief pause. And if you permit it, I would like to know you. Not Eliza. Vivian Ashford. Vivian stood on the snow. The document still in her hand, bearing her name. And before this man, in the open street, unmasked, she felt this moment had been earned. Entirely earned. Through everything, her father's death, the mask, the 20 days as Eliza, the humiliations in the corridor, the midnight in the study. All of it led here. And this moment was not a gift, it was a result. She stepped forward. Met his gaze, directly, without retreat, with that steady composure she had built over weeks. In the library, she said, there are still Latin books. My uncle would not have sold those, no one buys them. Aldrich looked at her. Smiled, real, unguarded. I do not know Latin. It can be learned. Would you teach me? Vivian paused. Then, in that voice, unmasked, not Eliza, entirely herself. We shall see. And that we shall see, neither surrender nor refusal, neither haste nor closure, was exactly right. Because Vivian did not believe in things easily gained. But she believed in things that could be earned. And this man, standing there in the snow, with that open question in his eyes. He could be earned. The Ashford estate was returned to Vivian at the end of winter. When she entered the house for the first time, passing through the door, the steps, the corridor she had not seen in so long, something very old and very new existed within her at once. The old, her father's presence, wood and books, that Devonshire house. The new, she was no longer alone. She entered the library. The shelves were partially empty, her uncle had sold some volumes, as she had expected. But most remained. The Latin book sat on the upper shelf, untouched, gathering dust. She ran her fingers along their spines. Then pulled one free, not the very book her father had held the morning he taught her the candle and key trick, but something close. She opened it. The pages had yellowed. A voice came from the doorway. Latin? Vivian turned. Aldrich stood there, coat on, a small package in his hand, something brought from London. He was smiling. Latin, Vivian said. Is it difficult? At first, yes. Then, she closed the book, returned it to its place. Then everything settles. Words, rules, meaning. Suddenly, you see it, and once you do, you cannot unsee it. Aldrich stepped inside. Came to stand beside her. Looked at the shelves, long, carefully, at the library her father had built. Your father spent a great deal of time here. Every day. And you did as well. Every day. Silence. Then Aldrich extended the package in his hand. Vivian took it. Opened it. Inside was a book. New, leather-bound, its pages still uncreased. When she read the title, she paused. Elementary Latin, beginner level. She laughed. Freely, genuinely, that sound never heard behind the mask, but now always present. You bought this yourself. I do not enjoy waiting, Aldrich said. I assumed the teacher would say yes. Assumptions are dangerous. Sometimes. That look in his eyes, open, direct, given to very few. But for certain things, they are worth it. Vivian held the book. Looked at its cover. Then at Aldrich. And this time, this final, real, earned time, she smiled. Not the smile of salons, not the smile of a servant. Vivian Ashford's smile. Unmasked, complete, whole. That evening, in the library, as the late winter light of Devonshire entered through the window, Vivian taught Aldrich his first Latin word. Veritas, she said. It means truth. Aldrich repeated it. Incorrectly, Vivian laughed, corrected him. He tried again. This time, closer. And the second? Vivian pulled her father's oldest dictionary from the shelf. Turned the pages. Stopped. Patientia, she said. It means patience. Aldrich looked at her. Do those two always come together? Vivian looked at the page. Then at the window. Then at him. Always, she said. Truth is earned through patience. It does not come any other way. Aldrich watched her for a moment. Then leaned over the dictionary, to learn, truly, as a student for the first time before someone. Vivian watched him. And within her, that heavy, earned, complete thing, the thing she now knew the name of, settled quietly into place in the light of the library. Years later, in that same library, before those same shelves, Aldrich asked her one morning, holding an old volume. When I first saw you, why did you wear the mask? Truly. That first day. Vivian considered. Long, honestly. Because if my face were seen, who I was would be seen. And if who I was were seen, what I wanted would be seen. And if what I wanted were seen, I would be left exposed. Aldrich looked at her. And now? Vivian smiled. Now, being exposed does not frighten me. Because to be exposed, before the right person, is the safest place there is. Aldrich placed the book back on the shelf. Stepped closer. Looked into her eyes, as he always did, not at her face, but into her eyes. Veritas, he said. Vivian laughed, freely, truly. Veritas. Outside, Devonshire spring was unfolding, first flowers, first birds, that inevitable, hard-earned spring after a long winter. And in the library, two people spoke the same word, knowing the same truth. Truth is earned through patience. And what is earned, estate, name, trust, love, is always more valuable than what is given. Lord Wellington Wyndham, one of London's most established figures, who had believed his position untouchable, fell within 12 months of the court's decision. The unlawful acquisition of the Ashford estate brought other questions with it, other estates, other correspondences, other Morses. Merritt's office remained busy. The Wyndham family withdrew quietly from London. The great house was sold. They moved to a smaller country residence. No one visited. Reginald Ashford, Vivian's uncle, architect of the plan, destroyer of the will, failed to sustain the resistance he had imagined. As Lord Wyndham fell, he pulled Reginald down with him. In the end, the two men chose to destroy one another rather than save each other. Reginald lost his property, his reputation, and was not seen again in London. The younger brother returned everything he had taken from Vivian's father, not with interest, but enough. Harold Morse, the elderly, silenced witness, spoke more strongly in court than anyone expected. With trembling hands, he signed. With a trembling voice, he told the truth. And as he left, he took Vivian's hand, a long, firm handshake, carrying much within it. His son kept his position. After the fall of Reginald and Wyndham, no one cared enough to threaten the small position in Bristol. Harold Morse passed that winter with a letter from Vivian, a letter of thanks. He replied. They continued to write. Cecily Wyndham, the brightest figure of society, bearer of that perfect smile, suffered most from her father's fall. Because Cecily's value had been bound to the Wyndham name. When the name was damaged, so was she. The engagement had already been formally ended by Aldrich, citing the family's unlawful dealings, a reason that could not be challenged in society. Cecily appeared in London for a time, less radiant, less certain. Then it was said she had withdrawn to the country, to a distant relative. Perhaps she found a real life there. Perhaps not. But at the very least, she was forced to live without a mask, and that, for Cecily, was the truest consequence. And Vivian Ashford. She returned to her father's house. Restored the library, repurchased some of the books her uncle had sold, replaced others. Repaired the garden. Fixed the leaking roof. Renewed the kitchen. She did all this not only with her restored income, but with her own hands. Because she did not wish merely to own the house. She wished to reclaim it. And reclaiming required labor. She took no servants at first. Lived alone for a time. But this solitude was not the solitude of Wyndham House. There, it had been filled with danger. Here, it was her own, clean, restorative, chosen. On some Tuesdays, she returned to London, to finalize documents with Merritt, later for other matters. And as she passed Fleet Street, she would see Aldrich's office. Each time, something within her stirred. She no longer denied it. The wedding took place that May. It was not grand. Vivian did not wish it. Grand weddings were for society's gaze, and she had no need of that. A small church, a close circle, a table in the garden beneath Devonshire's long May light. Vivian did not wear white, but cream, her father's favorite color. She carried no flowers, but her father's dictionary. Old, worn, its pages yellowed. It might have seemed strange to others. But to Vivian, he had to be present. In this house. On this day. Aldrich waited at the church door. As she entered, he looked at her, as always, into her eyes. And on his face, with all control set aside, there was only this person, this moment, this truth. The ceremony was brief. Words were spoken, traditional, yet full. And as they turned at the end, Aldrich whispered. Veritas. Vivian laughed, freely, truly. Patientia. And together they stepped outside, into the May sunlight, the garden, the long table, the waiting guests. Vivian Ashford, with her true name, her true face, stepped into her true life. A life earned. In that room at Wyndham House, on a table, a white porcelain mask still remained. No one had taken it. No one had asked. New servants had come, cleaned the house, yet the mask had not been discarded. It had been set aside. Forgotten. And there it remained, silent, empty, holding no one within. Because Vivian Ashford had left it behind. She had not returned. She no longer needed it. A mask was a mask. A person was a person. And in this story, from beginning to end, the true strength had always belonged to the person behind the mask. Always. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you're still here, we would truly love to know where you're watching from. Those messages mean more than you might think. And if this story stayed with you, if it gave you something real, consider subscribing. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told.